You've just finished plating the overlay of that whip that took you so many long hours to make, but it's the best one you've made yet. You've rolled it, you've waxed it, and now it's time to take that masterpiece outside and test crack it for the very first time. One of the most discouraging scenarios is to go through all of that work of making a whip, especially as a beginner, only to discover buckles and creases forming along the thong instead of a smooth loop when you roll the whip out. In this video, we'll explore some common causes along with simple fixes for this frustrating whip maker's dilemma. Hi guys, I'm Nick with the Whip Shop, and in today's video I'd like to discuss with you a very annoying problem that a lot of whip makers deal with. Now, whip making is a craft of precision, if you will. There's a lot of variables when it comes to it. So if you're having difficulties in a certain area, for example, you're throwing your whip out and you see all these buckles and folds and creases instead of a nice loop forming, and there's a few things that it could be. But in this video, I've narrowed down 3 of what I believe to be the most probable causes for this really annoying problem. The number one cause for creases and buckles in a nylon bullwhip stems from the usage of electrical tape, or any kind of tape for that matter, in the binding of the bellies. Now please don't misunderstand what I'm saying here. I'm not at all saying that the presence alone of tape in the construction of a bullwhip automatically makes the whip bad. That's not what I'm saying. There's a few really common mistakes to make if you're going to include tape in the construction of your whip. And if you avoid these steps, if you avoid these common mistakes, you're going to come out with a whip that's going to perform much better, it's going to last much longer, and it's going to be an overall better whip. So if you're going to bind the transition with tape, there's a few things that you need to watch out for. The most common mistake that people make, and I used to make this mistake all the time, is to bind very, very tightly. Like this. So you're binding down the whip for the transition. You think you're making the transition nice and stiff. So you come down here and then all of a sudden you go, well, that's it. Break the tape off, call it good, and move on to the next belly. Now this is a huge problem because you have all this tension here and little to no tension here. It's sort of like a cliff, a drop-off, if you will, of tension. This is very tight. This is not tight at all. This is a prime spot for creases in a bullwhip. So you can see that. Now, a lot of people ask me, Nick, do you use electrical tape in bullwhips? And the answer to that is no, I do not. And there's a few reasons. Wax cannot pass through electrical tape, so if you have a finished whip and you go to wax it, the only part of the whip that's actually taking on any wax is the overlay, and that's no good. Another reason that I don't like to use electrical tape is because it's just so stretchy. Stretched about 4 times before it finally broke. I used to use electrical tape, but I just don't like how stretchy it is. I feel as though if I'm trying to make that area, the transition of the whip, springy, I don't need stretchy tape working against me. It's kind of defeating the purpose. Now, I do use tape in the construction of my whips, but I'm not using the tape by any means to add rigidity or springiness or life to the transition. That tape is only there to act as a netting to keep the artificial sinew, or whatever I'm actually binding with, from slipping in between the strands of paracord. For a while, I was using floor mat tape to do this job, but I've since switched over to hockey tape. This is a fabric tape, a nylon fabric tape, that unlike the electrical tape has no stretch to it whatsoever, and it allows wax to pass through it. But remember, this tape has little to nothing to do with tension at the transition. It's merely a surface for my artificial sinew to evenly rest on. Now, another common mistake that you'll want to avoid if you're using tape in the construction of your whip is wrapping the bellies way too many times. It's very easy to identify a whip that's made with tape and tape only. A lot of beginner whip makers will feel the need to just wrap the transition 10 or more times with tape. And what will actually happen is, after use, that thick layer of tape will literally break in half. Now, electrical tape is notorious for doing this. To give you guys a visual of this, I've taken one of my old nylon whips and I've wrapped the end of the thong here 15 times with electrical tape. And before I started recording, I bent this back and forth about 50 times to weaken it to simulate normal use. And as you can see, a big old split has formed. Notice how thick that layer is, and this is just wrapping it 15 times. Some people will wrap it even more. So the thicker the layer of tape, the more likely and more severe that split is going to be, which ultimately would cause a big crease in your whip. So remember, easy on the tape. One layer, maybe two. Over that layer of tape, bind it with your artificial sinew. Now I have over here, this is one of my older nylon whips that I've got in the clamp here. And even though this is the overlay of the whip, we're just going to pretend that this is one of the bellies. Okay. So whether you're using electrical tape or hockey tape, I prefer the latter, by the way, we're going to take it just like this. We're going to start loosely wrapping the transition, about a 45-degree angle. Now, at what tension do you pull this? I like to just give it the amount of tension that it takes to take the tape off of the roll. That's what I like to wrap it with. And once again, this tape is doing very little to constrict the transition. So wherever I choose to stop this binding, I usually like to go on the second belly. I'll do about 2 feet of this stuff. So if I want to end this, I'm going to start loosening up the wrapping. I'm going to wrap it even more loosely than I did up here. And what this is going to do is it's going to eliminate any chance of there being rigidity here and no rigidity there, where the contrast, you want it to just fade out. You want the tension to fade out. So I've wrapped this fairly loosely here, and the last few wraps are literally just fingertip snug like that. And that's it for the tape. Now it's time to wrap it with artificial sinew. I'm going to be using some white artificial sinew so it's easier for you guys to see. I'm just going to bind it just like this. Going to spiral at a 45-degree angle one way, going down. Going to stop here. Go up to the top once again. And descend once again. This time going twice the length that we already have. What this is going to do is establish that tapered rigidity on the transition. Once again, we'll go up to the top. Filling in the places that we haven't already reached, as you can see. Getting as much surface area as possible. Now once we get here, there's a very important step. Instead of stopping where the tape stops, we're going to carry this artificial sinew beyond that tape. And this will eliminate any possible chances for there being a contrast between this area and this area, a kink right here. We're going to eliminate that by continuing on past the area that we've binded with our tape. Even though some of this artificial sinew might sneak in between the cracks, between the seams, I'm not concerned about it. Now as we near the end here, I am loosening up quite a bit, just as I did with the tape on the binding. So a little bit less tension, even a little less, even a little less, until finally I'm almost letting the weight of the spool wrap here. That's where I'll end it. Once again, I'll go up to the top, loose, increasing tension as I rise up here on the transition. A little more tension. Climbing higher along here. Go ahead and cut off the artificial sinew. And this right here is a very, very effective way to achieve a nice transition while still using tape. As you can see, it's completely unnoticeable tension-wise. You can't even tell where that tape has stopped. It's all one fluid transition. The second most probable cause for creases and buckles in your nylon bullwhip that I'd like to talk about with you guys in this video comes directly from how you are ending your plated bellies. Are you excessively wrapping the ends of the bellies with tape? Are you binding way too tightly with artificial sinew? Are you allowing enough distance for these staggered strands so that your taper is smooth? Let me show you right now my favorite method for ending bellies on a nylon bullwhip. Alright, the time has come to end this first belly of this 5-foot nylon bullwhip. We are in a 4-plat. Now this part is very important. We want these strands to fade out one by one in a staggered manner, okay? It's very tempting to want to just cut all of these strands off and then just end it right there. But that's not a good idea, because you'll once again have a drop off of tension. All this braided area here, and then a core with little to no tension whatsoever. So we want to fade these strands out tension-wise, just like we did with the artificial sinew and just like we did with the hockey tape at the transition. Now you really don't have a lot of options when it comes to what to use to fix these strands to the core. I'm going to go ahead and say it. Using tape here, regardless of what kind of tape it is not a good idea. That's going to give you way too much rigidity, especially since there's no binding here, and then the tape, it's going to be stiff, and it's not a good idea. So I'm using artificial sinew, using the color white. The color white? That doesn't make sense. Using white so you guys can see what I'm doing better. I usually use black. So let's go ahead and do it. Going to grab these strands, give them one last pull. 2 strands on the right will be tucked along the core, and the left strands will be doing the same, but on the other side. So I've got all these strands. This is where the plating stops. I'm going to go up 2 inches and wrap with my artificial sinew. Now I can't stress enough, when you're ending bellies, light touch, light touch. We really don't want to create any unnecessary stiffness here, because this is a very light part of the whip. It's very delicate. I am wrapping this very lightly, fingertip tight, just enough to keep those strands close against that core. So we are already getting ready to cut the first strand here. I'm going to grab a sharp pair of scissors, and notice what I'm doing here. I'm angling it to encourage taper. Just like that. Make sure that the strand, make sure they're not overlapping each other, and just continue to work my way down here. Very loosely. It took me a very long time to understand this concept right here. This is all very, very loose, because the next belly that goes over is going to do the constricting for us. Making sure that we allow enough distance here to encourage a nice smooth taper. I'm going to go ahead and cut our next strand. Set the artificial sinew aside. Once again, nice angle. Continuing down here, very, very loosely. Just 2 fingers. That's all it takes. Another strand we're going to cut. Notice how long this is. This is about 8 inches. We're allowing 8 inches for all these strands to one by one be cut off and wrapped to the core. And we're going to go ahead and cut our final strand right now. Once again at an angle. Now we're going to carry on this artificial sinew beyond this last strand here. There's a lot of reoccurring concepts here. We carry the artificial sinew past the tape, and once again it's for the same reason. If we stop it here, this is a prime location for a crease to form in the whip, even though it's a belly underneath. And this is, guys, this is so loose right here that I am wrapping this so loosely. So I'm going to go past it about 2 inches like that. And now I can work my way back up. Going back up to the top. And this is really, really loose here. Now we are once again in the plated portion. So I'm going to go up a little higher. And I'm going to stop right here. Cut off about 6 inches. We're going to do our little loop method here that I learned from Bernie Wojcicki. Fold this. Just going to lay this loop down here on the belly itself. And wrap. Once again, this is meant to be lightly wrapped right here. Every little area counts. If you're taking this last little part here and wrapping it tight, that's going to add too much tension. I actually probably did that a little too tight. So just fingertip tight like this. Careful not to overlap. And now we can go ahead and slide that strand through the loop. Grab our loop itself, pull, and cut. Now we have a nice flowing end to our belly, and I really want to emphasize just how much distance we took to do it. We didn't just cut our strands off in 1/4 inch increments and slap a bunch of tape on there. We did it with the artificial sinew, light touch, and that is a great way to end your bellies, and it should do a wonder for your creases and buckles and your whip. The third and final cause for creases in a whip that I'd like to talk about today comes from how you are dropping your strands. Whenever you drop a strand on a overlay or a belly, that is a potential weak spot on a whip. It's a very vulnerable area. If you're not giving that drop strand one last final pull, all of the other strands around it will have a lot more tension, and the strand that doesn't have the tension will cause a weak spot, which can contribute to buckles in your whip. I'm nearing the end of a first belly of a 5-foot nylon bullwhip. I'm getting ready to drop 2 of these strands here. We're still in 6 plat, and I always end my bellies in 4 plat. So I'm going to drop a couple of strands here right now. Now, dropping strands on bellies is a different method than dropping strands on an overlay. And I've showed you this in previous videos, but I'm just going to do it again. So here is the strand that we're going to drop. I'll give it one last little pull here. Now, I'm not worried about giving it a strong pull now. I'm just going to let it just kind of do its thing there. Upper right, just going to leave it alone. Now I'm under one over one on the right. This thing's just going to pretend it's not there anymore. So now we're going under 2 over 1 on the left temporarily and under 1 over 1 on the right. So this is our dropped strand. Now once we plate a little bit further down, we'll be dropping the other strand on the left side. And the reason I'm not dropping 2 of these strands at the same time is because that could also create a weak point. So here's our strand to be dropped. We're just going to give it one more pull and leave it alone, and that's where it's going to sit forever. Under 1 over 1 on both sides now, because it is now a 4 plat. Just like this. And now we can go ahead and give these strands one final pull, because as it is now, the strands above and below are tighter than these drop strands. And like I said earlier, that is a potential weak point. So, here's the way I like to do it. Especially when the strands get a little bit shorter, there's not a lot of area that we can hold on to when we go to pull it. So I do this on bellies only. I'll grab a pair of pliers, grasp the belly, and just give it a nice pull for both of them. And that is how I like to drop strands on bellies. Now, all the strands, including the drop strands, have equal tension, so we don't have to worry about there being a soft spot here or a crease. My lighter. I like to leave about 1 millimeter of cut off strand there, so that way I melt it. And just quickly with my thumb, only do that if you have gotten a lot of practice doing it, because this stuff sticks to your flesh when it's melted. So just a quick brush there. And this method prevents those drop strands from creating weak points, which will contribute to buckles and creases in your bullwhip. Well, that's all for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the tutorial and learned something new. A special thank you to April Throgmorton and all of my other supporters over at patreon.com. It's because of people like you that I'm able to keep these videos going, guys, and I greatly appreciate your support. Also, if you like the video, please do hit the subscribe button. There are many more tutorials on the way, and I will see you guys in the next one.